Wow, this is very high tech. Brilliant, thank you. You do have to press on things. Thank you very much, David. What we're going to talk about today in this session is very much how is Europe going to get through this current winter, given the loss of flexibility that we've seen in the market. Now, this is just a picture of European gas hub prices. So two of the biggest ones, the NBP, which is the UK, the TTF, which is a de facto continental wholesale gas price based out of the Netherlands. And what you can certainly see is in the last couple of years, both an upward trend, some of that, a lot of that this year, but generally much greater volatility. So we went through a winter here with very, very little volatility, started to increase, and then last year we had an incredible amount of volatility. And the reason for all of that volatility is because we are losing what we call flexibility, or seasonal supply at the most high demand periods that we see in the winter. Now, that should tend to be reflected, that volatility in those higher prices in the winter should be reflected in what we call the forward spreads, the seasonal spreads. And that's what this picture here shows. And it shows how the difference between season ahead and spreads do, so season one against season two. So here, that's where you have summer trading against winter, and up here you have winter trading against summer. And what you can see is actually the spreads have certainly begun to widen out, that you've got that, but felt a lot more in the winter-summer spread. We're a lot more pessimistic about the coming summer prices, or we're much more worried about the current winter, then tends to be seen in the summer-winter spread. Now, the summer-winter spread is actually sort of more important because that's what's really encouraging people to inject gas into storage and to book that coming up to that period going forward. So there is just general more volatility, and there is widening seasonal spreads. And both of that reflect that loss in flexibility. Now, that loss in flexibility, particularly for the Northwestern European markets, but generally across Europe, is really focused on two things. One is the loss of storage, and certainly we've got another speaker who's going to focus on the NBP, but it's the loss of the biggest storage facility in the UK, which was Rough. It closed down, took about 4 BCM of storage out of the market for the winter. And the second one is the loss of Groningen, and we'll talk about both those. Now, where we are in terms of year on year, and certainly this has been important for the coming winter, is generally, and throughout all of this summer, we had a very, very cold February and March period last year, and that led us to use a lot of gas in storage. So we started summer down about 10 BCM. Now, after having a very volatile winter of last winter, you'd say, well, we don't want to start the winter short of storage. If anything, we want to start kind of back where we were, possibly a bit more gas in storage. And what we've seen is actually an inability to fill storage this year. So we throughout the whole summer and already into what's called the withdrawal season, we didn't inject enough gas. We didn't get back to where we were. Now, we're not that far off, okay? But certainly, historically, you'd say these are reasonably low levels to be going into the winter with. So we are subject to, I would say, a period where we're looking at not particularly great storage, not particularly low, not particularly high. We do think, for various reasons, you probably will see an improvement in storage this year, and you won't see a drawdown as much in storage as we did in the previous year. And that will certainly color our expectations of where we go. So that's almost kind of the conclusion. But why? Let's work out why we think actually you're going to be okay on storage levels this year. Now, the biggest loss, Rough was a big loss, and you'll hear more about Rough later. But really, the biggest loss in flexibility that we've seen in European gas markets has been decisions on Groningen. And Groningen is one of the largest fields that we have in Europe that produces natural gas. It's in the Netherlands. It's been producing for a very long time, Groningen. And it's been producing for such a long time that actually it started to cause earthquakes in the Netherlands. Now, these are pretty small earthquakes. They're not particularly large, but it has led to some very, very steep cuts in production. And from here you can kind of see this downward reduction. These are all fields within the Groningen cluster. But the Dutch government has come out and has already taken out about 20 BCM of production from 2014 levels, just by saying you can't produce any more than a specified cap. Now that cap continues to fall every year, and that gas is really sitting at the heart of Europe, and that continued reduction in Groningen is having big impacts. And even last winter, when we had a very cold winter, you could see year on year you got less gas out, and you got less gas out just because the Dutch government said you have to close this field down, and they're looking at closing the entire field down by 2030, but almost all of that production will be gone by 2025. So in a not very short period, we're going to lose most of this as well. And that is a continued challenge for the European gas market to get through. Now we could kind of say, well, we'll get some of that through Russian supply. We can turn around. Russia's got a lot of gas. We should be able just to import more gas from Russia. And what you can see is generally as Groningen gases come off, yes, we have. So this is year-on-year changes in imports of Russian production. And that's been pretty consistent over the last couple of years. But we are getting to a point where actually it's becoming very difficult to increase imports of Russian gas. And there's two reasons for that. One is physical, and the other is contractual. Now the physical reasons is because you're actually starting to run out of spare capacity at most of the key border points. So most of the key border points are here. So this is one which brings you into here. Another one which is coming in through Poland brings you here. That's called Kontratki. And then the other ones which comes into Slovenia here, and that is called Velki. And at the moment, as you can see, from these three key points, you've got no spare capacity now to bring in gas through the north, through this pipeline here, Nord Stream. So Gazprom is building a second one. You've got no capacity generally to bring it in here through Poland because you filled that up. And so you only have spare capacity coming into Velki. So that's really important. But when you look at where Gazprom produces gas, the other thing that becomes apparent is almost all of the growth capital that Gazprom has is coming in the Yamal. And that Yamal gas can really only enter here or here, given the way the domestic pipelines are. So the center of production gravity is going from here, which was historically where it's been, to up here, where it's all kind of new, and they're reinforcing all of the pipelines along this route, and particularly along this route, which is to get it into here. Now this new pipeline, Nord Stream 2, will provide Europe with a lot more winter flexibility, because we'll all of a sudden have the ability to bring more Yamal gas in. Now, that's okay, but it isn't expected to start working probably until the first quarter of 2020, so we have this winter to get through, and at least half of next winter to get through before we get that additional capacity. Now this just brings it home in terms of what's happening with Gazprom gas, and this is our forecasts, and these are the historics there, but you can see that generally all of the growth in gas production has been in this red block here, Yamal. And when you look at all of the fields that they're developing, it's all in that red block there. So all of the additional and new capacity will be coming in to Yamal. And the rest of the Urals, they had a little bit of bleep here, which was one brand new field which they brought in at Urengoy, but that's going to start to decline. And so you're going to have less and less gas to go into that southern market and almost all of the market here. But what this kind of suggests is Gazprom doesn't actually have a gas bubble. It's going to be changing where a lot of the gas comes in, because naturally all of that Yamal gas will come into Northwest Europe and less will go into Southern Europe. But it doesn't have a big gas bubble to throw at Europe that we can use to backfill the losses we're going to see from Groningen. Now, one of the interesting things, I'll just touch on this briefly, which is providing a little bit more flexibility, is Gazprom export. And this was the other constraint. So the other constraint was capacity. And certainly we had the CEO of Gazprom come out earlier this year and say, well, actually, the way we tend to market gas is always through long-term contracts, and Europeans are maxing out what they can take under those long-term contracts. We have no other way of selling this into the market. And so what Gazprom Export has done, and this is very, very different, is they opened up something called the electronic sales platform and have started to sell short-term gas into the market. And they started doing this in September, and so really November is the first month where you've had very much, but they're selling it a month ahead and 2 months ahead, and they've sold about half a BCM worth of gas. Now, all of that comes in through Velki. So these are all southern entry points. Weidhaus is on the German border, the virtual trading point, Slovakia, and Baumgarten, of course, Austria. But that's the only place you can get any incremental gas in, and Gazprom is starting to sell because under the contracts, we've taken up almost all they've done. Now, I'm not going to dwell too much on LNG because we have a whole presentation on LNG, and it's going to be great. But really, when you look at this, there is still a lot of capacity to come in LNG. And for the first time for a while, we have started to see a little bit more LNG coming into the European market. And when you kind of look at the numbers here and the numbers here, they are chunky enough that if all of these things come online, even with very, very strong Northeast Asian demand growth, which has been one of the reasons we haven't seen very much LNG, there should be a little bit more LNG around for the European market. And that provides, again, some more supply, and that supply helps pad things out. Now, what's really important, because we have to compete for LNG with the Northeast Asians. And those Northeast Asians are three big countries in terms of the LNG market. It's Japan, China, and South Korea. And all of them tend to be willing to pay more for gas than we need to pay for gas to balance the market in Europe. And so what we watch is something called the JKM TTF spread very closely. Now, the JKM is the Japan-Korea marker, so it's an Asian gas price hub. And we compare that price with the price prevailing at the tidal transfer facility, the TTF, and you can kind of see that at various points in time, those ARBs are actually favoring bringing various types of gas to Europe than they are to take them to Asia. And the two key ones are what happens to Yamal gas, and that's because Yamal is up in the Arctic Circle and comes via Europe to get to market. So as soon as you get lower than that price, you would say that LNG should stay in Europe. And then there's here, which is US, and when it gets lower than there, you would say even US LNG should predominantly come to Europe. Now, if we looked at these curves a couple of months ago, generally all of those, except for maybe this summer, would have been above all of those lines. So the Asians have been very, very strong buyers of LNG. We do think you will get some more LNG coming into the European markets this winter. It's not that much, but it is more, and certainly, you know, a few outages or a little bit more of Asia, or a very cold, let's say, period in Northeast Asia, and those numbers could be less. A mild period in Northeast Asia, those numbers could be a bit higher. Certainly, November is starting very mild in Northeast Asia, and that suggests we could see a little bit more LNG maybe coming to us in November or over December. Now, just to quickly run through this, because we're doing lots, I think one of the other places we'll get some flexibility is last year was incredibly cold. So these are European heating degree days. It's a measure of how cold it is against normal or against the previous year. And you can see October was pretty mild. We had a pretty cold November and December, a pretty mild January, so the heating degree days were down, and then very, very high February and March in a very cold period for weather. So we had very, very high demand because so much of that demand is tied up in residential commercial, which is all about heating. And what that kind of says is even if we just have a return to more normal weathers, we would expect demand to be lower in all of those periods where you had a very, very cold month last year. So you're looking at November and December and February and March probably being lower in demand year on year than they were this year. So that's going to help us get through the winter. Power, of course, is important, and I'd say power demand is a little bit mixed. Certainly Nordic Hydro has been one of the stories of this year. this was a lot worse earlier in the year. I mean, it was up at about 20 terawatt hours short. Now it's only, we say it's only, but it's around 8. There is talk of it getting slightly better, but those are kind of the Nordic numbers. But they are slightly better in alpine reservoirs, very good in Iberian reservoirs. But of course, you also have more nuclear. We expect to have more nuclear power than we did last year, just because the number of outages that are scheduled and that are coming in are less. So in terms of the underlying demand for gas into power, we actually think, again, that could be either flat or slightly down year on year. Now, this is my last curve, and we always end with the most difficult thing to see if you were all paying attention on all the things that were before. But what these curves do is these curves show the break-even price for gas in power. And it does so with various different efficiencies of a gas plant against a coal plant. So this is a very efficient gas plant, and this is a pretty inefficient coal plant. So your gas plant has about 26 percentage point efficiency advantage over the coal plant, and you get that fuel switch at a pretty high gas price, right? So at the highest gas price. And you can go through there where you go down to a 20% efficiency and then 10% efficiency, et cetera, till you get to the point where you actually have no efficiency advantage for the gas plant, and you need a very low gas plant to do that. Now, what you'll notice about these curves, and these break-even curves, is they've been strongly trending up this year. And they have been strongly trending up this year, and they've been strongly trending up because coal has added a bit, and carbon has added a lot. So European carbon all of a sudden got very expensive. It started to come down actually a little bit. If we'd extend these over the last week, it would probably start coming down because of the repricing downward of carbon. But really, when you look at the gas market this year, apart from this beast from the East period here, you would say that it's pretty much traded along this blue line. Now, if you go back in time, you'd say, well, actually, it traded on the same blue line as it did last year. But it was just trading, when it was doing that, it was trading at 15 or 16 euros, and now it's been trading at 24, 25 euros. So almost all of that uplift hasn't changed its relative competitiveness in power, but what it's done is it's just kept the same level of competitiveness in power. So the gas price has just been reacting almost all year to those big increases in the carbon price that we saw last year. Now, what this means, I think, though, and what you tend to see is when you do get a very stressed gas price, the first thing the gas price tries to do is get less gas into power, because it's trying to feed all that gas into the residential sector, which is so hungry for gas when it gets cold. Now, when the gas market gets loose, it starts coming down this way. And certainly at this point here, when it started going up there, we saw European storage the year-on-year storage gap started to widen, and then it started to come down. And the relative prices, as we got more and more gas into storage, have started to come down here. But what we think this means for the rest of the winter is, outside of any particularly very, very cold events, the market will probably trade between these 2 points, right? And that's that's saying that's a €2.5 gap in terms of the gas price. That's a fairly wide gap, but that's where it's going to trade. And when the market at the moment is fairly loose, it starts trading down here. And after your first cold spell, it's going to go up here. But the problem, I think, for the market is because we are in that world where we don't have that much flex, we don't have that Groningen gas to fall back on. It's become very sensitive and very open to these types of spikes. Okay, that's a lot of stuff. This is a little bit about us, our energy aspects, and that's it. Brilliant. Do we have time for... Huh? We've got question time. Anyone, who can both hear me and has a question, please feel free to ask. And if you want to ask the next question after Klaus, you'll get thrown that and you'll be expected to catch it.
All right. So. Let's see if it works. Does it work? Can you hear? Okay. So my question is, you showed one slide. Can you hear? I'll speak loudly.
Is that one?
No, it's working.
Is it working?
But it's not working here.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll
listen closely. You showed a slide that Europe actually should be attracting all the LNG when you look at the pricing signals.
Yep.
But then right next to it you showed very little arriving. Why? Explain what could be the reasons.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's very good. this question here, I mean, I would say two things. So this is incrementals, right, rather than totals, right? So it's not like it's going to get here, which it did almost 2 BCM of additional supply it didn't have last year, which in a month is actually a pretty big amount of gas, right? I mean, it's not nothing. It's certainly not nothing. And here it'll have a BCM more than it got last year. So that's the first. The second thing is if you looked at the curves over the summer, almost for the whole time, and really this is just saying Yamal, which is the most expensive gas to bid away from Europe, that's the only stuff that you would send away or that you would keep in Europe. And the rest of it, anything else at spot, so any Qatari spot, any US spot, you would still on these prices send it to Northeast Asia. Okay, so that's what that curve's saying there. Now what this does hold out is that for this summer, the curves are saying we should get a lot more US LNG coming into the market. And of course, if we get to the place where, on my first slide, we were saying actually you're going to end up with a lot less, with a lot more gas still in storage than you were last year because we have demand side, et cetera, then this holds out, at least the possibility we're going to have much cheaper gas come the summertime, because we're going to have A, less demand for injection, and B, a lot more LNG that should be coming into the market. Okay, does anyone want to like try and catch the box? The microphone box. Go on, somebody just wants to catch it and ask a question. No? Okay, well on that, I'd like to thank you very much. You've been a great audience, great.
Thank you, Trevor. And you saved 5 minutes out of your time, so that is going to be used by Klaus, I guess. It's his turn, and well, I'll let you go with it.
Thank you. Let's see how this works. Okay. I'm going to take you a bit on a bigger, wider journey now. And we're going to go a bit more higher up, more abstract, and look at how global LNG has actually changed the European market. How is it going to change it in the future? And also what you can take away from it. So the global LNG trading, how it really is influenced. Here's the 5 things I want to cover in the next 15 minutes or so. We have questions then at the end. We want to talk about the global factors influencing the price. Then I want to take you on a history, abstract history of the evolution of the markets, global markets, so you understand why it's influencing it. Then we're facing the new global market, how it's impacting Europe, and of course at the end, where are the opportunities? Where can we make some money? And who is going to be the winner? And who's going to be the loser? Of course, we love talking about these things. So just to set the stage for you, and a lot of us here in Europe, we're at the European Utility Week, don't actually understand or actually know how influenced we are nowadays globally. And here's a couple of examples that I've seen live, and I'll give you 2 examples. A rainfall in Brazil. It rains a lot one year, it rains very little one year. That's one factor that's influencing things. Air pollution in China. Having very bad air in Beijing, having very bad air in the Chinese cities. Nuclear power plants in Japan after Fukushima, coming online, coming not online, regulatory policy in Japan, local objection, is it coming online? And of course, my favorite topic, Trump. Going up against the Chinese, going up against Iran, in this case, trade tariffs against China, and the Chinese retaliating. You'd think all these things don't affect you as a European utility player, energy player. The truth is, they all have an increasingly impact on your price. And my whole 15 minutes will be about why. How do we get there? And why is this happening? The rainfall in Brazil, very simple answer, of course. The more rain you have in Brazil, the more the hydro dams are full, the more they generate power off hydro, the less gas they need for their power. The less LNG goes to Brazil, more LNG comes to Europe. Prices impacted. Air pollution in China, no secrets. big surprise in the last 2 years, the Chinese cleaning up their act for the cities, converting huge amounts of coal-fired heating to gas-fired heating to clean up the pollution, and drawing gas into Asia, into China, and drawing it away, and causing huge spikes in gas prices we talked earlier. The nuclear power in Japan, no secret, the more nuclear they build, the less LNG they need, and the more nuclear they bring back online. And finally, of course, Trump. Lots of uncertainty now. With Trump going up, how is this going to play out? Nobody knows. But if Trump going to follow through, Chinese has already followed through with import tariffs on LNG, meaning more LNG in the market for Europe. So all of these things impact you, like it or not, and will impact you much more than I believe all of you are considering at the moment. So why is this? So let's go for an evolution. Why do these global factors influence a price? And I want to take you back abstract, because it's important to understand how do we ended up here, and why are we here, and how is this making all sense? The evolution of the domestic market, I would call it, starting out with the European domestic market. You have your production. They found some gas in Groningen originally. They built some storage to get some flexibility, and it goes to end customers, so to power gen. Very isolated, very much back to back. This is the times of the Aeons, this is the times of the Chazunis. This was the 80s, the 90s, bit of the 2000s. Classic markets, but very not much more influenced. Then late 90s, 2000s, UK started hub trading. Okay, we put a little hub trading in there. It now gets a bit more transparent, you get a bit more flexibility pricing, flexibility is priced a bit more, but again, it's an isolated regional market, European market. You start expanding a bit more integration in Europe, we all have seen that, it's happening. But what you end up at the reality is, we had a European market, and we still have a European market, and many of us here think, oh, we're in the European gas market. And that was the truth until just about, I would say, 5 to 10 years ago. You have your isolated market, supply and demand, various factors, but you know what? Quite manageable. And utility companies have done a great job, traders have done a great job in managing that market, learning it, and they think they have it all nailed up. But things changed. Things changed really 5 to 10 years ago. To get to our regional gas market to global, the reality is we have a European liquid market. We also, of course, have a US liquid market with hub trading, much more advanced in Europe. But we also have what I call generally an Asia market. Again, you'll see, I don't have a hub trading in here, but it's still, there's supplies. You can call this China, you can call this Japan, Korea, local markets. And you also have, as an example only, a South America market. Big market, quite isolated. So you had these standalone markets that traded very well, had their own dynamics, and their own supply and demand portfolios. Okay, what happened next is this. We found gas in Qatar, we found gas in Bintulu in Borneo, in Malaysia, as an example. We found gas in Trinidad and Tobago. We couldn't get the gas to market. We built LNG liquefaction. LNG is nothing but natural gas cooled down at 162 degrees, makes it liquid. A lot of people say, oh, it's the LNG market. Forget about the LNG market, it's a gas market. It's just a simple way of transporting it, nothing else. So you liquefied it, you build a regas plant, and you exported it. And usually, originally, these were point to point. You know, we take it out of the ground in Trinidad and Tobago, and we take it to one customer, 20-year contract, really hasn't influenced anything. What happened next, in the last 5 years, is really what made the difference. You had all these individual regional markets, and you started having these E&P players. I take Qatar as a great example. Huge gas, didn't know where to put the gas, had no way to access these markets, built the liquefaction, and of course, Asians opened up first. Japan and Korea rely on LNG almost exclusively for their gas. So you start bringing the gas into Asia, and you're breaking down that market and tying it for the first time in. Next, you have Europe. I was part of a Dragon LNG terminal for 6 years. The first LNG terminal, by the way, was in England. It was actually Canvey Island in 1962. So actually the Europeans are actually the founders of LNG. We just needed some time to catch up. But you have Europe open up, and all of a sudden the border around the European market disappeared. Next, South America, floating importation into the South American terminals. And then of course the latest one, really only since 2 years, North American exports. And what you have, of course, is now suddenly an LNG trading counterparty in the middle. And if you look at this, you now understand why we're influenced by all these various factors. For once, everything you do here is influenced and linked with the LNG trading in the middle. And that's something that a lot of us players don't want to talk about, don't want to listen about. So what's the key takeaways? You also have some new markets opening up that haven't been there before. If you look at this picture and you think it's very complex, you're right. This is the issue that we're all facing. We're now looking at a global gas and energy market that is so hugely complex and so complicated and so many factors that it becomes almost impossible to decipher what's going on. And that, for me, is the next challenge of us in the energy industry. And that's going to set aside the winners from the losers. This complexity that we have today is already impacting us today, like it or not. A lot of us think here that we're not influenced, but you can do various research and various things, and you'll find that actually all of us is already influencing it, and it will just keep increasing, influencing our European market, big time. So why is this? Why are having suddenly an LNG, not just a global gas, but a global LNG market? I mentioned earlier, LNG is nothing else but gas. So for me, I actually don't like to use the word LNG. I like to call it global gas. Makes a lot more sense when you talk about global gas going around the world. Same gas that you heat your kettle and tea with is the same gas that's coming out of the US. At the end, it's methane. It's just in a different format. So we're dealing with a global gas market. Now that global gas goes into your residential industrials as we have. So you're competing now on a global basis with people who use the gas to heat the houses in Beijing, with industrials in South America who use it for whatever they do. And you, as a European player, are now suddenly have this global supply and demand you're going to have to fight with. But it gets more complicated because gas is an input to power. You're suddenly dealing with coal, hydro, nuclear, renewable input, all competing with you on the global gas side. And of course, on the back of the coal, hydro, nuclear, new technology, global policy, rainfall we talked about, safety records, and everything else. So what does this mean? You are suddenly in an ecosystem that is complex like you've ever seen, influencing ultimately the marginal gas price, marginal power price in Europe. And you always think that, oh look, supply and demand fundamentals, we understand it. We have got Trevor, who's the expert at it. Yes, it's a never-ending game. The struggle is this model has just become so huge and so complex that it becomes unwieldy and very difficult to deal with. So here's what I think my takeaways are. What does this mean for Europe? Where do we go for the year? First, you've seen the complexity. The reality is, if you want to be an energy player in any market, no matter how small, how big you are, you now need global energy models going forward. Your domestic model, your European model, your German model, your EU model, your continental model, no longer is adequate. You need to start adding up international global energies, complex global energy data. How can you do this? It's too complex. I've tried to build a global model for 3 years. I think I was about 10% there. There's 90% work to be done. It's a massive undertaking. The data is there. Lots of people say, oh, you can't get the data. You just got to find it. From the rainfall in Brazil to the nuclear generation in Japan, it's all there. But you need really strong digitization, and I believe you need some AI to really collect all that data. You need somebody who can feed that data, put it into an algorithm, make sense of it. So that for me is the first thing. Global energy data is going to become really crucial. Second thing, LNG trading alone is not a solution. And why am I saying this? Too many players come, oh, Klaus, we understand we're a utility and we ought to be in LNG because we're missing something. Well, you're looking at it the wrong way. LNG is a small piece that just links everything. The LNG is just the facilitator. So being in the LNG market ain't get you anywhere. You got to be in the global gas market, and you got to really figure out, because the LNG price at the end is just the clearing price between demand in Brazil, rainfall, nuclear in Japan, everything else we just talked about, and the LNG itself is just a reflection of these millions of inputs of thousands of smart traders and systems who then determine where this gas goes. So LNG trading alone, forget about it, is not what you need. And if you're thinking of getting into LNG, think again. Either you do it all way and build a global gas desk, global energy desk, or don't do it at all. because this half-assed thing of going in LNG trading itself, for me, just doesn't make work. The third item is China. We briefly mentioned China. I loved one thing that did last year. We built a global gas model that wasn't anywhere near good enough, and then we plugged China in. And you dial China 2 degrees, click, click, everything gets blown out of the water. We don't understand how huge China's impact will be on us. We are peanuts when China starts moving in the energy space. We've seen it the last 2 years. Anybody who's followed the market has seen on the global scale, China suddenly started converting their coal-fired housing to gas, and it massively swapped up the LNG. Nobody expected it. It was massive, it's unpredicted, and then all of a sudden it dropped back off, it came back on. China is going to determine what happens on the global energy market. And China is a controlled economy. They very much know what they're doing. They can turn it up, but they can also very well turn it down. And on top of it, we talked about China not just having global LNG. There's a new pipeline coming in from Russia. They're going to be able to take pipeline gas, so then they can play pipeline gas versus the global gas. It's going to be complicated. And if you need to do anything in your world, start building China capability. No matter who you are, what company you are, you've got to have a China expert on your team. It has to be a China expert, because if you know, or if you have some models what China is going to do, that's where you're going to win. Don't ignore China, because you can spend 99% of the time on Europe, on Russian supply. We can talk about import capacity, who's going to export from US. But if China goes, rip, all of your models are out of the window, and you might as well waste your time. It's that big. And the final item I have, of course, global diversity. Many of us, including myself, have focused on one part of the value chain. We're good at what we do. Very few of us have looked at that bigger picture I showed earlier. So the new talent we need is actually quite a different talent. We don't need expertise in one. We've got to find some people who have a holistic view, who understand global markets, who have US experience, European experience, Asian experience. Now, how many of you have all of that? I don't have that, and very few people have that. But that's going to be the next future leaders. The next CEO of a big energy company in 20 years is going to be somebody who has done global work and has a cross-commodity talent across all of these. So my final slide then is, okay, where is the opportunities? Show me the money, Klaus. We're going to be able to make money in all of this global environment that we're now entering into. First, of course, we mentioned before, technology around data and AI. I have a data and IT background, and if I would put my money somewhere, it's in developers of technology who can make sense of that global energy data. It's a huge scale, it's massive, it's not enough for one human brain. I think you're gonna need artificial intelligence to process that, but whoever does that is gonna be a winner. And I have one insight for you that I don't think it's that confidential. I've had some discussions, and lots of people are rumoring out there, with players like Google and other players who have nothing to do with the energy space today, who are starting to wake up to the idea that the energy retail space is just a data game. The same way their Gmail and advertising is, it's a data collection exercise. If they manage to collect data, process it, they have an advantage. And there's various talks about Google starting to go into retail power, retail gas, or other places. And the reason is they're good in this. And they know this is going to be the future decide on who makes money in this space. And I would put my money on a data provider who's going to make that work. The second item I have for opportunities, geopolitical risk and insights. Lots of us live in an isolated work in a German environment, Austrian environment, British environment, American focus. Very few of us start to worry about geopolitical influence. Well, we talked about Trump making it even worse. That's what you need to know. And no matter what you think, it's going to influence you. So you'll get your geopolitical insights going. The third item, or the final two items are, what are the opportunities here? First, of course, this opens up global arbitrage. No secret, you have a global market. It's never going to be perfect because it's not liquid, especially when you deal with Asia, and a lot of clearing prices all around the world. So the players like Shell, BP, Vitol, Trafigura already figured that out, but there's plenty of more room. And when we talk about global arbitrage, an LNG cargo is $25 million, 20 to 30 million, depending on the price. If you make 10%, that's $2 million. If you have 300 cargoes, that's $600 million. Suddenly you have a business. Suddenly you're actually making big money very quickly on a global scale. And the final item, and Trevor mentioned it as well, is volatility. Because of this complexity that none of us understand, including myself, and none of us really want to understand, causes volatility. Regional prices jump, and we've seen in Trevor's presentation, you see the jumps, cold spells here and what, all of this gets influenced by all these global things that you and I have no control over. Volatility is here to stay, volatility is going to increase, and it's going to be macro regional volatility. Europe might jump, Asia might jump, and we've seen that already. We've had Asia go up to, a year ago in the winter, to $12, going back down to $8, all geopolitically driven. So therefore, volatility is where you can make your money, or if you don't want to risk it, hedge and get global risk management. Hedging is going to become crucial because you're going to get burned in this global environment on the global space. So that's my takeaways. Thank you very much for your time. Hope you enjoyed.
We do have time for one question, if there is any from the audience. Quick.
Okay. Thank you very much, Klaus. Very good presentation, very, very interesting. You can run for next US presidential election. No, they're getting into a serious mood now. The question is, LNG is the key to get, let's say, a global market running. Do you have a feeling of how much investments are on run to build new infrastructure in order to get more capacity of regasification?
So that's the holy grail. How much LNG are we bringing on? The first thing that I think a lot of us don't spend enough time on, I spent some time in Qatar. Qatar is increasing LNG massively. And the reason they're increasing it is not because they want to make money on the gas. They want to get the damn condensate and oil and liquids out of the ground. Qatar is building huge LNG liquefaction that's already paid for, that has no cost to the gas. They're doing it simply to debottleneck and get the liquids and make them to money. So the market, like it or not, is going to be flooded in good ways or bad ways. Not flooded, but certainly increasingly supplied by Qatar. I bought a Qatari cargo at 20 euros, delivered into Europe a while ago. And everybody said, how can this happen? The reality is with Qatar, they've written off their ships, they've written off the investment, the gas is literally free. And they're going to increase supply onto this market that we just talked about with marginal, no additional cost because they want to get the oil and liquids out. That's going to change the dilemma, change the overall supply image. That's just Qatar. Then you get to the US projects, and we talked about who will make it in the US. Some of them will, some of them won't. But Trevor showed on his curve, when he saw that curve, and we didn't stress that, that curve was well below. In today's environment, all of these many of these US projects make sense commercially. You could lock some of that in if you can. You can certainly take risks. So we're certainly going to see US coming. We talked about the US supply out of an area called Permian. I don't know how many of you know in Texas, there is a field where they're producing oil where, again, the gas comes out as a side product. It's free, literally, and it's trading around less than $1 today. That's gas that's going to get liquefied, cheaper than anything else, come to market, no question. So you've got US supplies, you've got Qatari supplies, of course you have Russian supplies coming online, even though they might be expensive, but politically, we all know if Russia wants something, they're going to do it, and it's going to happen. We're going to have Arctic LNG 2 coming, then you have all the Asian players still growing. There is so much more LNG coming that will just cause more oversupply of that market, and therefore drive that market liquidly forward.
Thank you, Klaus. So I guess we're No, we don't have time for another question, but we can take it later for the debate. The story is started coming up. The first chapter was that we have an issue with volatility, and that there are a number of fundamental changes in Europe that will make flexibility absolutely key going forward. And then we have heard from Klaus saying that well, the word is very complex. He's used the word complex I don't know how many times, surely more than 10, and therefore that we need a new companies and new skills and talents. Story goes on, and I think now we have Volker on stage, and he's going to talk to us about.
Thanks, David. So I think I was very lucky to have Trevor and Klaus as the first and second speaker, because basically what I'm telling is something of a summary we've already heard, of course. And it's trying to combine what Klaus and Trevor already said. So, all right. All right, so the realities of European gas markets, they're changing, and we already heard that they are probably changing much faster than we anticipated, because in March 2018, as Trevor already mentioned, the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy in the Netherlands, they decided to phase out Groningen gas. And Groningen gas, as Trevor mentioned, is a huge source for indigenous production in Europe. It's a huge flexibility provider. However, this source has to be balanced somehow. And what we've seen in the last years that pipeline imports within the EU, and particularly it was the Russian imports, they increased and balanced the indigenous production decline by Groningen, and this decline will further move on. So on the right side, you see the gas supply, you see forecast of IHS, and the question, how will this indigenous production decrease of Groningen, how will this be balanced? It will be partly by pipeline gas, most likely Russian gas, as we heard, as they are increasing also their transportation capacity to Europe. How much LNG will come into Europe? I will talk about that in a minute. Of course, China plays a big role, as Klaus already mentioned. On the left side, you see the demand picture for the U28. So what we can see is, even as IHS projects, even if the EU demand for natural gas will be flat, the import gap will increase. So this will basically mean that Europe will be much more connected to global markets, as we already heard. And this will be the case because probably some of the LNG will come to Europe, and this basically will expose European markets to global trends. So if we see what does that mean, we see basically European prices. We don't talk about regional prices anymore. I mean, if we talk about a large import gap in Europe, we see that LNG will basically influence also Europe. What we see on the left side is how the different hub prices or benchmark prices have developed through the years from 2012 to 2018. We see that, of course, several events have mainly influenced the different prices. Of course, the Japan LNG import price was basically influenced by the Fukushima accident, which mean that about 54 nuclear reactors basically went off in Japan. So they had to increase the LNG imports in order to put on their gas-fired power production. And then we have another mega trend we just heard from Klaus, and this is the shale gas revolution in the US. So Henry Hub prices, they decreased throughout the years because basically the gas which was the shale gas which was produced proved to be very, very resilient, and Henry Hub prices decreased throughout the years after shale gas revolution. When we see that European import demand will increase and LNG will be part of the balance, we see that, of course, Europe's regional price. Europe won't have a regional price anymore. Europe's prices will be influenced by LNG, and so the European market's interconnected by global trends. And I just would like to talk a bit more about these trends, because as Klaus already mentioned, China is playing a big role. So he said that everybody should basically get knowledge about China. It's very much true. If we see how that LNG import demand shifted all over the years, you see that basically all of the demand shifted to Asia. And this is because the China has very, very determined policy in order to clean up their air. And this is something which is very, very hard. There is a plan, but nobody really knew how determined China would be in order to push forward this plan. And the last 2 years have shown that they are very, very much determined to clean up their air, to switch from coal to gas. And what we've seen is it's not only the residential sector. We have also seen that in the industry, which use a lot of coal still, small coal boilers, they have been switched to natural gas, and that has shifted a lot of demand to China. And indigenous production, China is also producing gas. However, the geology in China is very, very difficult. So the demand, which was basically incentivized by the coal to gas switch by energy policy, that couldn't really be balanced by indigenous production. So they had to balance this increasing demand, incremental demand. Pipeline sources, currently they are importing much from the Caspian region. However, the Caspian region couldn't really provide much incremental gas for what China needed at that point in time, the last 2 years. The gas pipeline to Russia is still under construction. It will most likely be online at the end of 2019. So we maybe see some of the volumes kicking in 2020, which left basically the LNG market as a tool for China to balance its demand. So this was one of the major developments we've seen in the last years. Another one which I just have mentioned is Japan. Of course, much will depend on the question how long Japan will really have this high share of gas-fired power production in their power portfolio. But so far, Japan, the Fukushima disaster in Japan, and the energy policy in China, that was something which was really, really pushing forward, and was the main factors for Asian import demand to increase. What you see also is the question, and Klaus a little bit touched upon this question, how well supplied is the market really? And what we've seen, the slide before, we've seen that prices have decreased throughout the last years. So there was not much of an environment for investments to invest in LNG, and this can be seen in the graph down to the right, that FID liquefaction capacity, the FIDs which were taken, they were basically decreasing as of 2014. So that means the wave of liquefaction, increasing liquefaction capacity we see, which is coming from Australia and from the US, that FIDs have been taken some years prior to the years which we've seen here. So if you look on the right side of the graph, you see how much liquefaction capacity is really coming online. And IEA projections, they say that we see a kind of a peak 2018, 2019, and thereafter liquefaction capacity is basically going down. So the big question behind that is, do we see a market getting tight? And this question, of course, depends on a lot of factors. And one of the factors, of course, is how sustainable will demand from China and Japan be? And estimations say, and estimation are about China is that the climate policy and the policy to increase the air quality, that is very, very sustainable. And so far in Japan, experts, they don't see a very, very high likelihood that we see a fast-moving mix of the power generation in Japan. At some point in time, we will see that nuclear power is coming back. But so far, Japan is considered to be quite sustainable in their demand. However, we have seen some smaller emerging economies in Asia which have imported LNG. And this is because that regasification has been, the costs for regasification has come down. And that is quite not a technology change, but it's something which has been in the market for a while. But regasification can be done either by an onshore terminal or by a FSRU, which is a floating storage or regasification unit. What this basically means is that it's like a ship which takes up the gas. In terms of costs, in terms of commitment, in terms of how long you need in order to set up such an FSRU, that is smaller compared to an onshore terminal. So this kind of technology has incentivized emerging economies in Asia to take up more gas. However, they are very cost sensitive, which means that in terms of sustainable demand, it's very, very hard to predict if countries like Pakistan, for instance, if they are really importing gas on a sustainable basis, or if they will move away from the market if they see that LNG prices are increasing. Because as an alternative, they could use coal, as India also is using quite heavily. So in terms of how tight can a market become, that's very, very hard to say, because it really depends on how sustainable demand from Asia, as we've seen, and this is the large part of incremental LNG imports, how sustainable this demand will be. So if we look on the picture down, we see that the dominant importers of LNG, which were Japan and Korea, they have lost some of the share if we just compare the Asian part of the LNG import story. So Japan's share, if we take the period after the earthquake in Japan, it has imported 53%. It's down to 40%. 2017 numbers. China basically doubled their share, LNG import share, from 9% to 18%. Other Asia, which is including the emerging economies in Asia, they have also increased 17 to 24%. However, what I said is still valid. How sustainable this demand will be, that is some of the questions which are really is a high uncertainty in the market. So we have seen that the Asian system is transforming. We've talked a lot about China, which is transforming the energy sector. They're transforming the energy sector, and they going away from coal. They're increasing heavily their renewable share in the power generation mix, but as well they're increasing their gas share. However, gas demand more comes from the residential commercial sector and from the industry. What we see in Europe is that also the European power generation mix is transforming quite heavily. And this is something which is also a uncertainty, how this will develop and how this will basically influence the gas demand in Europe. Among all fossil fuels, natural gas will be the only fossil fuel, and that's what the IEA is saying in their World Energy Outlook 2017. Natural gas will be the only fossil fuel among all fossil fuels to increase demand for power generation. However, we see a lot of uncertainties, of course, because we know that there are a lot of policies in the European countries. They're discussing phasing out coal. Partly, well, in Germany, the decision already has been taken to phase out nuclear power. How much of that incremental demand, which is needed in order to produce power in Europe, how much of that will be natural gas? That, of course, also depends on the support this fuel will get from the policymakers. So to wrap up, basically, it means that, of course, renewable share will increasing quite heavily. But among the fossil fuels, the IEA at least believes, and I think there is quite a fair chance that this will happen, that gas will also be will be the fuel and the partner for renewables in order to balance the power mix. So we've heard, and it's definitely true that the import gap will increase in Europe. Because the indigenous production, Groningen specifically, That decision has been taken by the Ministry of Economic Affairs in the Netherlands to phase out Groningen. Import share will decrease. So how is the status of Europe? How does Europe look like? Is it prepared in order to increase the imports? And the answer is that Europe is capacity-wise, it has two main options: pipeline gas, obviously, and LNG. It's already in pipeline importing a lot of pipeline gas. A lot of projects are constructed or are in the pre-construction phase. So Europe, in order to import more gas, has two main options. And the thing which I said in the beginning, of course, Europe will be very much interconnected to the global market. It will be very much be connected to questions what will happen in Asia, how sustainable Asian demand will be. However, Europe also has some sources connected with pipeline gas, which is of course Russia. They are increasing the capacity, as Trevor already mentioned, by building a second pipeline via the Baltic Sea. Other pipeline capacities are also increasing. Capacity-wise, and from the diversification perspective, Europe definitely is ready to import different sources of gas, either LNG or natural gas by pipeline. What will be the main source? That will basically depend on competition and what source will be competing better in Europe and what will be more competitive. So to quickly conclude, I mean, what I previously said, even if demand will be staying flat, European imports they will rise because of the decrease of the digital production. LNG surely can fill part of the supply gap, but pipeline or gas is still there in order to balance the decreasing indigenous production. Gas markets are increasingly connected regionally, and Europe specifically, because Europe will have a high import share and thereby will be more connected to global developments. So it is of crucial importance to understand markets which are outside Europe, including major energy global players like China. And Europe is to become more and more a global flexibility provider in LNG. I think Trevor already perfectly described what will happen in terms of flexibility. Of course, there are a lot of other drivers. Just to mention two of them: decarbonization, that's heavily influencing the power generation mix, so that will be a central drive in Europe. And of course, the various national exit strategies we see across Europe, and what this will mean for gas in the power generation mix. So that's it for now. Uniper is providing some of the flexibility. We are very present in a lot of countries, 40 countries and more. We have a lot of trading for LNG, for gas. Our main strategy is to manage that flexibility, which is increasing in the global markets. Thank you very much.
Happy to take one question here. Otherwise, we'll go to the next session. Although you haven't said it explicitly, I've also heard the story of a supply conundrum for Europe. And maybe we can talk about it later in the panel, because things are not necessarily or fully consistent with the story that we have heard from Klaus when it comes to the LNG availability at the global level. So it would be interesting to know how the two of you can interact. So we can now move to the next presentation. So Danilo, the floor is yours.
How we move here. That's it. Great, thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, try to be brief so we have more time for discussions. Very short presentation on what I would call a new configuration of EU gas market after DG Comp deal with Gazprom. And I would argue what the antitrust agreement, has really far-reaching implications for the gas market. Let's say it goes beyond, proper, business plans of Gazprom, and actually, as I would argue, would be the last, last piece in efficient and self-ruling gas market in Europe. So what we see now, was already before before the deal. It's what Davide was mentioning in his introduction. It's of course increased level of market convergence. First, we had, of course, minimum spreads between between wholesale prices of member states. Most of the time, it's below €1. It's a great level of interconnectivity. If you see the gas flows, they're most of the times, bi-directional. There are some energy islands, or like not very well connected regions like Southeastern Europe, but level of connectivity are increasing. There are like two exceptions. I'm going to talk, say Finland and Poland. But for Finland, by 2020, this wouldn't be relevant because of Baltic Connector would be built. And in any case, gas is a very minor fuel. For Poland, as certain requirement, the difference is not due to the lack of alternative supplies, but rather to the regulations, of storage. For instance, the recent study of gas value chain company claimed what the storage obligations in Poland, adds up to almost €1, to the gas price in the state. So that's the map from the recent report, indicating, let's say the hub prices and the import prices they declared at the border. And we see what's when we're gonna go further into the Commission data. And David was already mentioned, what basically the price in the East and the price in developed markets are almost the same. So let's go back, 2013, that's the data on the wholesale prices, average wholesale prices for the first quarter from the European Commission. The divergence was huge. We see, like, for instance, Estonian price, let's say Latvian price is almost 50% higher what you will see in the Netherlands, at TTF, let's say, or at NBP in United Kingdom. Same map, let's say 5 years, let's say later, and we see, as I said already, ACER prices, gives us, more or less the same picture, more or less equal prices with some exceptions. We saw a bit even lower prices in Romania and Bulgaria, but that's mostly due to the fact what's gas supplied where is sold on the Groningen formula, and basically it reflects the lower oil prices, a couple of years ago, 1 year ago. So, coming to the essence, let's say, what's the DG Comp deal with Gazprom was about and why it's important for the energy market. So there are 4 main pillars. Basically, it's destination clauses might be abolished. So it means all the customers of Gazprom in all the member states has a right to resell the gas both at home and abroad. And of course, that's increased market liquidity and contributes to the natural price environment. That means what basically Gazprom gas is competing with itself in Europe. Second point is I find extremely important because what Gazprom has to offer a competitive price, let's say, through the whole Europe. That means that the price has to be aligned to TTF. And that is important because that's the factor will lead to automatic changes in oil-linked contracts. Because once with oil prices going up, let's say obviously with a 6-9 months lag, gas price will follow, but it has to be corrected so it reflects, let's say, the the price levels in Germany in at the hub, or TTF. That's, of course, commitments of not using infrastructure as advantage. That's mostly relates to Bulgaria, which was pardoned for the abandoning of the South Stream. And one of the most important things, and then here it reflects to the market structure, is what Gazprom will have to take active steps to integrate gas markets in the CE. And what means Gazprom clients which have bought gas originally for Central Europe might have a right to have it delivered either in Bulgaria or in Baltic states. Why it's important? Because these two regions of Europe, are still not very well connected for several reasons. Either, let's say, an ability of promoting a cross-border cooperation. That's always the case in Balkans, but also in the Baltics, or what the projects are still not completed for technical reasons. So basically, what Gazprom is doing here is obliged by Commission to do here is to together, to be a part of Connecting Europe facility and provide these existing links. So basically, once you bought the gas from Gazprom, you can deliver it to the market and compete it with Gazprom per se. That's basically the rest of interconnectors. Most of this will be built in 2020, 2022. I would put on the numbers 7 is extremely important and 15. Once 7 and 15, 7 is Poland, the Lithuanian interconnector, and 15 is interconnector Greece-Bulgaria build. We can say what's neither Baltics nor Balkans would be isolated. So, let's see what you already have interconnectivity. You have working mechanisms, and you have a decision obliging, basically forcing the major non-EU supplier to behave according to specific rules and then contribute to market liquidity. But still, our proposals of Commission, let's say, to further modify existing regulations. So, what would be the market implications of new gas directive? Officially, of course, it's for the benefits of the market and for the benefits of consumers. I looked into two reports, two ideal reports, one delivered in March. It's analysis of directive per se, the draft directive, and second, its impact on relations with preferred countries, which was released a couple of months ago. And what we see, the key messages, it's basically most of it, it's either necessary changes because they basically double existing things, or we just create additional risks. Some quotes from the first report published in March was, for instance, the transparency which new draft is advocating for, they're already being enforced by network codes, let's say. So you cannot, let's say, misuse it because otherwise you're gonna break the conditions of network codes, and be fined, let's say. Second, unbundling is unnecessary because there is no, third-party access for most of these pipelines. And in any case, they are already legally unbundled because the infrastructure onshore and offshore are owned by different entities. And last but not least, the tariff regulation, which was also transparency, was proposed by Commission. It's indeed may be effective for disclosing the transport element of in the price of gas, so consumers, are knowing how much, transport costs, what's the percentage of transport in the final price. But in any case, gas has to compete against the market prices. So it doesn't really matter. Because you cannot sell gas more expensive because you're gonna either compete with renewables or LNG or other pipeline suppliers. And second thing, of course, you cannot sell gas expensive in case of Gazprom, because otherwise you're gonna broke one of the 4 key conditions of the deal with DG Comp, and you're gonna be fined, and fine can go up to 9 billion euro. My conclusions. It will be interesting to see because in June, Commission, DG Comp, launched a similar investigation against Qatar Petroleum, also preventing the competition. that's investigation might take the decision might be we might be waiting for the decision for 1.5 or 3 years, but most probably we will see the similar deal. I mean, let's say when Qatar Petroleum will have to take obligations under the threat of a fine, I mean, which will contribute, I mean, to market liquidity. So if we see it, I mean, we can say it's a precedent, and I made here parallel with a blockchain. So if it works like this, and both deals are enforced, you have, in a way, a smart contract, but smart contract not in relation to gas sales, but smart contract in terms of how the whole system, the whole market is functioning, where you have a hardware, like interconnected, different interconnectors, so you can physically move gas through Europe, I mean, let's say, like in all directions, and you have regulations which create a situation breaking them is unprofitable for your business. So by the end of the day, you create a situation where everybody is without unnecessary politicization, unnecessary regulation, are behaving in the most efficient way. In a way, I mean, let's say, and then again, coming back, I really like this quote from Shell. I mean, it's already old, over 3 years old, when was a public consultation regarding the communication on LNG, and Shell submitted its opinion, and very interesting definition of energy security and what was the threat for energy security. And Shell said what's the major threat to energy security in Europe, it's incomplete implementation of existing regulations. So basically, you don't have to invent wheel, I mean, or over-regulate. You just have to, and then there are major examples where like member states are not compliant or in direct violation of existing rules. Just implement over rules and play by the rules, and then you have efficient market and energy security by itself. I mean, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. Do we have questions to this? Yes, we do. Good.
We're not going to catch the...
Yeah, you will.
Hi. I have one question, whether EU is taking care also of the excess non-EU countries, meaning Serbia, Macedonia, and Bosnia, if it's included in the policies or not, because I have problem with contracting in Serbia, for example, and they're always saying it's Gazprom.
Technically, it's not part of the EU, but as a part of energy community, it has to implement third package rules. I mean, let's say in one way or another, but with different delays. I mean, let's say, and it's basically implementation in certain countries of energy communities has already been completed, like the case of, for instance, Moldova and partly Ukraine. In certain things, I mean, where there are still delays. It's a bit much more complex issue because here, like, there are formal obligations because by signing into the energy community, they took obligation of transpose third package and existing regulation in a key into their system. But reality is much more complex, I mean, say. But if you see, there are plenty of countries in the EU which still are in direct or indirect violation, I mean, let's say, of third package. I mean, and then Bulgaria, for instance, is not fully compliant, I mean, let's say, et cetera, et cetera. You have things in Poland which are also like not fully compatible, for instance, storage regulation. So, of course, it will take some time, I mean, let's say. Sorry? There is a plan when the countries will fully implement it, but let's say reality is much more difficult. Like, I mean, for instance, if you see what's happening in Ukraine with unbundling, like how complicated it is, I mean, because it's a lot of things, the local politics involves, I mean, it's like, and the schemes, I mean, it's unbundling or adopting regulations. So, like, you cannot really predict, I mean, when it's going to happen.
So the story I've heard from Daniel is a story whereby the construction of the single market tried via implementation, enforcement of competition law may not necessarily work in the way that is desired. This is, if I make it a very short line out of what you said. At this point, we are supposed to close for a coffee break, and I'm happy to do so. A, because I need the chargers for my battery of my phone, otherwise I cannot keep the time for the next session. But B, I will break only if you promise that you all come back to the session, as many as you are, because there are 2 other interesting presentations, and then we will see the panelists debating among each other. So please come back in 30 minutes. Half of you have returned, but maybe others will come. So Robin will start, and I understand that you will bring about a view on storage. No, it was
GB flexibility.
GB flexibility market. Sorry, yeah. In general, which I think is very relevant on the premises of what Trevor has been telling us. So yeah, we're all looking forward.
Okay. Okay, yes, so thank you for coming back, those of you who made it. I'm going to take a slightly different slant on things. Instead of looking at the seasonal flexibility and the wider flexibility, I'm going to look at the short-term flexibility within the UK. Find the clicker. And how our approach is working or not working. So in terms of the current short-term flexibility market in the UK, we've got a relatively good set of demand supply areas. Key areas for demand that affect us greatly are weather sensitivity, power production, the within-day profiling, and supply disruption. So over the past few years, the requirement for short-term flexibility has increased, but our system has continued to deliver. And my question really is around whether or not we're going to be able to continue to deliver. So in terms of the demand that we've got in the UK, obviously the same as any country or in GB, one of the key areas of demand is the local distribution zones, the residential customers, the industry working at a distribution level. So if you look at the graph there, have I got a pointer? No. So if you look at the graph on the left for you there, what you can see in blue is the demand from the local distribution zones in the UK. As you can see, it's not particularly flat, and as we move through the year, we can have enormous flex in demand within day versus the red, which is the electricity side of things. So one of the key areas for that is in terms of the weather. So 1 degree's change in terms of the temperature can be up to 13 MCM in terms of gas. So I know lots of us have been told, okay, gas demand is going down, steadily going down in the UK, but as you can see on the right, our highest day gas demand has started to increase. Okay, 2018 may be a little skewed by the beast from the east, but there is the start of a trend there. So, as I'm an Englishman, you wouldn't expect me to carry on without talking about the weather. So the weather does play quite a large part in terms of the effects on our gas demand within day. The orange part of the graph at the top there shows the use by gas-powered power stations. That, as you can see, it varies, yes, in terms of day-night demand, but also the quantity varies, and that's primarily to do with renewables. So when the wind is blowing, we are not using anywhere near as much gas, but when we've got no wind, we can see a large increase in the demand for gas to power in our energy mix. Now, that has been switching with coal recently, But at the moment, obviously, our targets are to reduce coal down in 2025. Current forecasts are showing that that means by after 2025, we could potentially need 90 to 100 MCM of flex for power or power to gas when there is no wind. So we also have down there at the bottom the grey, the nuclear. This delivers very little flexibility in the UK. I'm not sure it does anywhere. It is a base load. So as a result of these requirements for gas to power in the UK, what we see is a far, far more volatile situation. And if you look at the bottom graph there, just for October 18, sorry, the one above is purely October 18 as well, up to the 29th. What you can see is the variation in demand from just CCGTs, gas-fired power stations, sorry. So one of the benefits that the electricity market in the UK has versus the gas market is the capacity mechanism. So where we are short or potentially short of electricity, we do have a mechanism by which gas-fired power stations and other power stations are paid to remain available to the electricity network. Now, there is no such thing for the gas side of things, but that requirement for a capacity market will draw down on the gas on a day when we need a large amount of electricity. There we go. So those are the two main areas of demand that we've got. But obviously, when we're looking at demand, what we're looking at are primarily what do customers want? What do industry want? So key points, security of supply. They want to know, in terms of industry, that their gas is there, that they can keep a kiln running, that they can keep production running. They want to be able to predict those prices. Nobody wants a shock in terms of their prices at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter. And they always want lower prices. Now, we can't always deliver lower prices. But in terms of the flexibility market, what that's allowing us to do, the short-term flexibility market, is to jump in immediately to support the market. So when we've got supply disruption, there's a lack of wind, we're able to smooth out that market before the prices start to rise significantly by immediately entering into the market. And I'll talk about how that's possible in the UK in a second. It's also reducing the volatility short term, which again is giving a beneficial pricing effect to industry and the consumers. And also where we've got flexibility, I know I've said long term here, when I'm talking about long term, I'm talking about maybe a week on a short-term flexibility market. So where we've got sufficient flexibility over that period of time, it stops that pricing signal getting too high to drive other entrants into the market. So having said that, I suppose I should talk about the supply side of things and what's actually available. So obviously we're an island. We've done very well in the past with production. So we've got access to both the UKCS, the UK Continental Shelf, and the Norwegian Continental Shelf. UKCS has been steadily reducing its production over the last few years and is likely to continue so. The Norwegian side of things seems pretty steady. Their forecast is they're going to be available for at least 50 more years. They've carefully managed that supply. However, both are relatively inflexible during the day, and particularly in winter when they're running at absolute maximum, potentially at absolute maximum, there is not a lot of flexibility to increase supply. One of the other things that we've seen a lot of this summer, and in fact last winter as well, on the UKCS particularly, is it is beginning to age. We are seeing more outages, and those are causing within-day issues, or day, 1 or 2 day issues that are impacting the MVP. So moving on from supply, we've already heard today about LNG, and I must admit, yes, I totally agree with Klaus in terms of, yes, it's global gas. We are, as an island, we are entering into a global marketplace. The LNG supply can provide us flexibility, but we are quite reliant on it at times just for the gas to the system in the case of a long-term outage. And looking at some of the recent figures from the IEA, they've actually placed the United Kingdom, if you look on the graph there, on your left, the blue circle there, the United Kingdom is sat between a diversified gas importer and an exposed gas importer. Now, this I'd expect to improve over the next few years. We're starting to see more US LNG coming in, and hopefully that will start to balance that level of risk. But we've got to have LNG in a tank to be able to actually deliver gas into the marketplace to meet the flexibility requirements. So right now, everything looks really good. Prices in Asia are not high enough to cover the cargo rates over there, so we're seeing plenty of gas coming to ourselves, also coming into Northern Europe. This looks great right now, but when we get a particularly cold season, can we be guaranteed the gas? Will the price signals mean that it's coming to us? I'm not so certain. I'm hoping the US LNG will continue to come. But one of the key issues for us really is if there isn't the LNG in the tanks, it's going to take a few days to get there, and that was also recognised by the IEA in their gas security review this year. Hopefully things will be better. Well, better than they expect, but one other impact that we have seen this year is with the end of the long-term contracts on the interconnector. What we've seen is less Qatari LNG actually arriving in the UK. It's getting more expensive to ship it across to northwestern Europe. You know, it's not very far, but we're seeing it land more in Zeebrugge now. And that takes me on to the next source of supply, the interconnectors. So in terms of the interconnectors to the UK, for supply, we have two available. There's Interconnector UK and the BBL. Both are perfectly capable of within-day response and meeting the requirements of the market. As I mentioned, IUK has lost its long-term contracts, so this means the marginal cost to move the gas are higher. And what we see with interconnectors in terms of providing that short-term supply for customers and consumers is there's an entire chain of costs behind them. Wherever you're bringing your gas from, you've got capacity and commodity costs to cover before it reaches the UK. So that means we're pushing up that price for the consumer whenever we're bringing gas through that. So hopefully it's a slight, we can hold off the need to respond in that way slightly without the prices going too high, but it is one of the easiest ways to respond to a within-day requirement in the UK. But because of that marginal cost between, say, a storage in Germany delivering into the UK, we need the prices on the MBP to rise. We are a totally market-driven island, and so without those price signals, nothing will move. So coming on to storage, which yes is my area, but the intent here is really not to focus on storage. We have in the UK had a changing situation on storage. Trevor mentioned it earlier. Rough has closed down. There is no more long-range storage in the UK. What you may or may not be aware of is we've also lost about 30% of the flow capacity from Hornsea, which is a fast storage site, and 20% of their capacity. Aldborough, another storage site in the UK, quietly mothballed 12% of its capacity this summer. And also this summer, Hull House, another site near ours in Cheshire, was totally mothballed. So when you look at the two graphs of capacity between 2016 and 2018, you can see a significant drop in available storage capacity. And what is remaining there is medium-range storage, but fast cycle storage. There is no long-range storage available anymore. Alongside that, why are these storages shutting down? Well, the environment for them in the UK business environment is very, very tough. up to 50% of the operating costs is taken in tax. It's a property tax. It's the same tax that Amazon pays. So they pay it on their warehouses. A gas storage pays it on the size of its caverns. That's quite a big tax. Also, in terms of the changes to tariff codes, that's also having an impact, not just on storage, I should point that out. It's likely to have an impact on all the supply for flexibility. The changes to the tariff code in the UK mean that we are going to change the capacity prices for entry and exit. And in many cases, that is pushing them up, whether it's for an LNG facility, whether it's for a storage facility, or whether it's impacting a long-term contract from a supplier. So already we've got additional barriers being put in place to the ability for the market to flex and deliver gas quickly. So in terms of storage, theoretically, yes, it's the fastest local response to get gas into the market quickly, assuming it's available and assuming that the price signals are there. And as I say, the price signals may be increasing, that may drive volatility. And then the next step, I guess, would be the interconnector or LNG, depending on who's got gas in the tanks or who's got, or what level of price we have in the market. But just to highlight, and I know this is a figure that's been bandied around a lot, but when I compare the UK gas, storage capacities to any of the European countries, what we're looking at in the UK is roughly 2% of the total UK gas demand can be met by storage. And in Germany, France and Italy, that's roughly 25% that can be met by storage. So we do have one other source of supply. I hesitate to call it a source of supply because in my mind it's not. So we have seen the use of line pack. So the gas that is used to support the pressures in the network to keep it operational. We're seeing much larger swings within day in terms of the usage patterns of gas. And National Grid will tell you this, and this is on the right there is one of their graphs. So early morning in the UK, we have a decent amount of gas delivered. Sorry, we have a decent amount of gas that's taken off as demand, as everybody gets up, cooks their breakfast. An English fry up is obligatory. And then later in the day, as we are a daily balanced system, we start seeing the within-day flexibility come in to lift it back. So that's what the line pack should be doing. That line pack should be allowing us to balance those two systems of demand and supply. But what we've seen, and it's an extreme example, but the instantaneous NTS line pack graph down here at the bottom is what happened during the Beast from the East. And what you can see is the line pack being significantly depleted each day as the weather gets colder because there's insufficient gas flowing into the system. So at that point, we are using our line pack to supply. This doesn't fit my idea of line pack. So in summary, I'm not going to tell you how to fix it. I can't. We're a market-led system. However, what we are facing is reducing storage capacities. We've got no new investment signals for new builds. We're reliant on LNG in the tank to meet very short-term supply issues. We need price signals that are significantly above any normal day, I believe, for a flow from the interconnectors to meet that within-day flexibility requirement. And one of the other things that is not necessarily considered, and I've not really gone into, is the impact of the interaction between the electricity and gas markets. If we need to ramp up electricity, we're going to start depleting gas very quickly, and that's going to happen more in the future. Line pack, as I mentioned, is also an issue. It shouldn't really be used for balancing purposes, and certainly not in the way it was for the Beast from the East. And then finally, the emergency supply arrangements that we have. So I suppose it's an older version of what was the capacity markets for electricity. These were designed for long-range storage, so the ability to call off constantly large quantities of gas on any given day by the network operator. Now that doesn't fit too well with a gas storage. It may work well for LNG if there's gas in the tank, but we are then totally reliant again on price signals to refill. So repeated cold spells or repeated issues could also be a major issue. And as we're a market-driven island, then these prices, all of this is driven by the prices on the NBP, and that is going to drive those costs onto consumers. So my summary here is yes, we may be a fading star, and what we really need to do is look at how we can improve this flexibility market. And I have left till the very last word the fact that this may all change under Brexit. So thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Do we have a question for Robin now, or yeah, please?
Hello, Imperial College from the UK. What role do you see for biomethane or biogas in the next 10, 20 years in the UK system?
Yeah, I certainly see a need for it. We've got to diversify the sources of supply. We've got to ensure that we are using green gas, and we need gas sources like that to support the transition onto more renewables. So yeah, it's something that we will need. And with those sorts of gaps in supply of 90 to 100 MCM for gas to power, then potentially it could very much be needed.
If there are no other questions for this session, then we move to Stefano, who will bring a perspective from an exchange, the GME in Italy.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Can I have me? Perfect, thank you. So good afternoon. I tried to bring, let's say, the new situation we have in Italy after the implementation of the new balancing code, which took place in October 2016. And we have been listening all the afternoon the LNG role in the globalization of the market. As far as Italy is concerned, we introduced a new, let's say, method to allocate the LNG regasification capacity through a market mechanism in our platform in GME. As GME, we are the energy exchange in Italy. We both run the electricity market and the gas market. So the first news, let's say, is that starting from this year, this LNG regasification capacity is allocated through a market mechanism. Regarding the new balancing system, we adopted, of course, the regulation of the new network code. And there are two main things that are interesting and changed, let's say, the spot market in Italy. One is that operators are incentivized to use the market to balance their position. And it is given by the regulation introduced by the Italian regulator. And the second point is that the TSOs, the Italian TSOs, must balance the grid through the market. So this was a very important step because all the operators were used to trade bilaterally without using the market, and even because they didn't find any counterparty in the market. With the introduction of this new system, TSOs is actually trading on the market. So its presence means that other operators are joining marketplace. There is more liquidity, more interest, and more volumes in the Italian spot market. The new market model we introduced on the gas, we introduced the central counterparty for the spot market, the gas storage market, and the locational products market. We extended the guarantee system from the spot and the forward market all together in order to facilitate market operation from the operator's point of view. Billing and settlement are unified, and there is the TSO's presence as NAM Rete Gas in its dual role of balancing and supply in the market. We try to concentrate on how increase the liquidity in the market, because as the TSOs must find the resources to balance the grid in the market, the price will reflect all the balancing costs of the system. So as much the market is liquid, more of course the price will be efficient, and more the action of TSOs will be efficient as well. So there are two main initiatives we took. One is to close an agreement with Tripert, so the Italian gas spot market is available on Tripert platform, so all the operators can find prices for the Italian market in Tripert. And the other initiative we took is to introduce the market-making figures. Starting from February this year, we introduced market makers. We have 10 operators that are actually operating as market makers. Every 6 months, we review the list of the market makers in order to choose the best performers, let's say, in the market. The presence of the market makers, of course, can guarantee the possibility for other operators to get into the market and to find a counterparty for their interest, to close their position, buying and selling positions. A quick overview on the volumes. So I started just to show on the day-ahead market and on the intraday market. Quantity, the weekly quantity we experience as volumes on our platform. This is a good rising trend as market makers are getting confident with their role. Other operators are getting confidence that entering into our market they can find their counterparty. So we saw let's say good volumes starting from this year on the day-ahead market, also on the intraday market, where TSOs is mainly active to find the resources to balance the grid. Daily participation in the day-ahead and the intraday market, just the period, the first 2 weeks of October, you can see that every day a good number of operators were present and were actively trading in the market. So minimum 21 up to 47, if I'm not wrong. So good presence in the market, guaranteeing possibility to close trades. Important point is that overall the gas traded on our platforms is representing more or less 10% of the total gas consumption in Italy, which is, let's say, not negligible. It's quite good compared to what we had in the past. It's a new situation, and we hope, of course, that things will get better and better. Summing up the spot market and the intraday market, gas trade so far is representing 7%. If we also consider the storage gas market, we reach 10% of the total volumes. That's it. I just wanted to give this overview on the market from the operator's point of view. It is important to know that in the Italian market there is now liquidity. Every day we experience volumes on the spot market. So if you are interested, please join in. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano. Are there any curious people about the way the balancing market works in Italy? So would you like to dwell a bit more on it? If not, this leaves us with plenty of space for a good discussion among all the panelists. At this point, Stefano, I would say you can be on stage as well with all the others. And so I would like to invite you back on stage. And then I will try to make it, as we have so much time, try to make it as interactive as possible. So I would start with questions from the floor. I know there was somebody that wanted to ask more questions. Otherwise, I will step in and facilitate the conversation. We are missing Klaus. Let's start. I have nothing else to do. Yeah. And you can I have a second microphone, and I'll be on. Pardon? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's so much time. Okay. So we are missing one of the panelists, but we will start anyway. Because not all of you were present, I'll try to make a very brief summary of what was said today, or at least mentioning the headlines of each presentation. So we started with Trevor, and Trevor spent quite some time telling us that one of the challenges that the European gas market are going through at this point in time is the need for flexibility, which is a reflex of increased volatility that we are seeing throughout Europe. Then we have heard Klaus, who, by bringing the perspective of the energy global trading activities, has shown as Europe is much more open to be influenced by external factors, and how we've moved from a regional closed market to more of a global one. And this has provided us already with a first link or brick added to what Trevor has discussed. Then we have moved to Volker, who has given us a bit of a more classic overview of market trends throughout Europe. And there we have heard that not only we have an issue of volatility, if we can call it an issue, and of increased complexity due to the links to the LNG global market, we might also have, although I'm pushing a bit the line here, also a supply issue in the sense that Europe may, with increased import dependency, be facing also a problem in that respect. I don't know if, Volker, this is exactly what you said. No, I can see you, but I have to push a bit the lines to see to see you, moving on the chair. You can move on the chair a little bit. Then Danila has jumped a bit outside of the strictly market analysis and dwelled a bit on the role of the Gazprom competition case, and he has told us how this could actually help improving the functioning of the markets, in particular in Central and Eastern Europe. However, then, and this was my impression from his body language, there is also, he left us with a question, whether the implementation of competition law by the European Commission is actually effective in doing this job, or whether there is not much traction, especially in a situation of strong import dependency described by Volker. And then with Robin, we have moved into a discussion on, or a reflection on the flexibility market. It was a discussion mainly driven by the UK perspective, but there is a lot of what Robin has said that is valid, although in different terms and different proportion also for other European markets. And when listening to you, Robin, I sort of wonder, we talk about flexibility market, but the flexibility market is actually something that doesn't really exist in itself. Flexibility comes from different bits of the gas market, and sometimes competition, if you look at it from your perspective, is not always fair. The sources of flexibility can be driven or impacted by a merit order defined by other regulatory factors, which that's to be challenged. If you don't think so, maybe less so in the UK, but surely it is in other markets. And then we have concluded with a presentation by Stefano on the introduction of the balancing network code in Europe, and how this has contributed to improving the functioning of the Italian market by increasing flexibility and making sure that there are sufficient counterparties in the market on a daily basis in Italy, and how, although shortly mentioned, how this has also, our liquidity is also benefited by the changes introduced in the way regasification capacity is allocated, which then links well back to the presentation of Trevor, of Klaus, who is not here. So this is a short summary of what we've heard this afternoon. I'll try again to go back to you if you have question. Otherwise, I'll start. Okay. So then, Volker, can you explain to us why we do not really have a supply issue, despite the figures and despite the import dependency dimension that you've seen, and despite the fact that you still have mentioned that the contribution of LNG, or the contribution of LNG is not that material.
So thank you very much. I think what we need to consider is, of course, Europe is increasing its import share, and it's more connected to the global market. And probably you are referring to one of the pictures I've shown, which actually comes from the IEA, and saying that we see a lower or final investment decision for liquefaction capacity, if you want to focus on LNG for a moment. And we see that the large LNG liquefaction capacity wave, which we might see peak in 18, 19, that this will decrease. Now, I think when we're talking about flexibility, where does the flexibility come from? And I think one of the important things to know is it does come also from contractual flexibility, and especially considering the US, which offers a great potential due to their contractual terms and providing destination flexibility. A lot of that is basically giving supply flexibility to the market. So it's not only from the liquefaction side, but also from the contractual side. And if we look into the contracts, we see that a lot of the legacy contracts which we see, they need to be renewed, and part of liquefaction capacity which we see is not contracted. So also this gives the market kind of a flexibility it needs in order to balance its demand. So it is very difficult and very uncertain still how to evaluate and how to see this market will develop. As I said, from the demand side, we have seen that a lot of the LNG demand has been shifted to Asia. That is kind of the big unknown, how sustainable this demand will be. And on the supply side, we see additional liquefaction capacity coming on, which will definitely balance some of this demand. And in addition to that, it will be contractual flexibility, which will offer the market some potential.
Clear, and thank you. Yes, please.
Good afternoon. I have a more direct question to the supply issue in Europe. We are mentioning the problems when Groningen will be switched off and we get Russian gas. We haven't mentioned East String and TAP, some Azerbaijan and from Turkey. And how big role does this play in Europe? Is it something serious or just marginal? Thank you.
Thanks. No, I mean, I think, when you look at additional sources, certainly stuff that could come through TANAP, and then, how that gets linked into the European market. You look at Turkstream, but that's just more Russian gas. But and then there is an immense amount, I would say, of infrastructure projects that are looking at that southern European market, could bring gas in through that southern European market. And that's quite interesting from a market view, because it could change, a lot how gas actually trades, or in terms of price differentials. The southern market's usually very expensive, usually at a premium to the TTF, it could come down. Now, the big question is how many of those will actually go through, and Turkstream's already, under construction, and TANAP's already done, and is there much more room in that part of the market for supporting more than those two pipes? And I think that, that's kind of the big question. Will you get an FID while you've got those two big pipes coming in? With still a bit of unclarity exactly how they're going to get into the wider European market, right? I mean, they're both coming into a very small Greek market that doesn't need that volume of gas, with issues about how do you get that gas further north without some of these, without East String being completed, if you don't get the pipeline into Italy, how does this stuff, get monetized? And if you do end up having a bunch of distressed, kind of Russian and Azerbaijani gas kind of sitting there, then probably you won't see anything apart from TANAP and Nord Stream coming in. But of course, I mean, when you add the two together, I mean, those are reasonably chunky, volumes in terms of supply, will be really important. And certainly if you get that infrastructure completed, I mean, you are kind of setting up a lot of potential supply in that area. And probably need to have, a pricing point down somewhere in that market, probably south of Baumgarten. And that would probably trade at kind of a discount, because you have a lot of supply and not that much demand. So I think it would open up some, what we kind of, interesting basis plays for gas traders out there to kind of look at, and certainly trade to get that gas, moving further forward north. And we can ask, whether or not, we will get that Italian pipe.
I'm not going to decide whether the TAP will.
But Stefano, before I let you go, the deliveries from Shah Deniz are also of a peculiar nature. These are flat volumes, so the flexibility will have to be sourced in the market. And so maybe you can comment also on this.
Yeah, I mean, the first point is whether it's going to be finalized, the TAP throughout Italy. And it is a big question mark, because it is a political decision. There's a big debate in Italy, as you probably know very well. The actual government is debating whether to approve it or not. The last weeks we had a very positive signal from the government sides, but they are still questioning whether it is good, it is going to happen or not. I mean, from the, let's say, market point of view, our feeling is that, of course, there should be a positive impact in terms of reducing the spread against TTF. Regardless, it is flat, it's more volume available in the market. And given the constraints we have throughout Switzerland, for example, and so on, this would have a positive impact on reducing the spread against the TTF and making the market more liquid.
So then, Robin, can we try to address my question, and if you think believe that in the UK it's all fine, whether you are able also to comment on the rest of Europe, because we see a very diverse picture when it comes to the way the flexibility market works in different countries, and so maybe we can learn, or we can see some regulatory recommendation coming out from your view.
Okay, so I'm not best placed to comment about flexibility across the whole of Europe. That's not really where I sit and what I do. I suppose on the regulation question, I don't see any reason for regulations in the UK to drive this. I think there are steps that can be taken. We know, so I mentioned the tariff code. So this, for those that aren't aware, the tariff code in the implementation in the UK was proposed by National Grid. There were 12 or 13 different modifications proposed for it. And through our process, not one of those was recommended. So this has now gone to Ofgem. We're waiting on a response for this. We, both as a storage company, but as a group of market participants, don't know what we're going to see. So yeah, I'd prefer to see something sooner rather than later on that, and I'd prefer to see it as a minimal touch. That's looking at it from my business particularly. But I think in terms of regulation, I don't know if you're referring to France and storage over there. Certainly we as Storage UK don't see any reason for that sort of regulation in the UK, and it's not something that we'd call for.
Yes. I mean, in France, it was generally welcomed as much as it was in Italy, because it was already a regulated access regime. So it's already a step. Of course, in countries where the access is negotiated, there would be absolutely no
certainly
need to move away from there.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's more easing the pressures. If I look at the storage business, as I'm more qualified for that one, easing the pressures on that is more around the business rates side of things. You're not going to get investment if 50% of your operating costs is taxes. You're not going to see that market develop. Whether whether you'd see that anyway, I don't know. We are market driven, but that sort of level of tax is likely to be a blocker. I believe there probably is something wider on the tariff code that would be better for all flexibility market entrants. So whether it's LNG, whether it's those people who are able to provide flexibility through longer term contracts, the implementation of additional costs that we even now I don't know what the costs are, and I'm involved in work for next year. I don't know what my costs will be. So,
okay. I'll come to you soon, but I think if a few years ago a buzzword could have been security of supply, probably because the Russian crisis was still fresh in the memory, I have the impression that the dominating word, at least in this panel, is flexibility, and so. Maybe all of you can comment on this, but Trevor, I would start with you. Flexibility is by definition bigger and more available in a more integrated and larger market. So harmonization of European markets should play a role there. Do you see it moving in the right direction? Do you think we have exhausted the inertia of the third package? Do you think, for instance, that because of the size of national markets in the area that is more lagging behind Central and Eastern Europe, maybe a regional approach should be taken exactly to move in a way that is helpful in that perspective?
Lots of big issues there. I mean, lots of big issues. So I'll only focus on a few of them. I mean, I think in terms of security of supply still gets mentioned. So, this panel, I think, if you're engaged in the markets, it's not so much a security of supply issue that you worry about, but it is that combination of do we can we get through the winters? Is there seasonal flexibility? You know, and we've lost some big seasonal flexibility. And then there's also very just short-term flexibility. You know, the markets are becoming very attuned to short-term weather patterns, and you know, we saw, the picture from the UK where, you know, you use even line pack because you have this need for very, very short-term flexibility in markets. And gas is actually okay for that short-term flexibility, and a lot of it's coming out of the short-term, the increasing short-term nature of power markets, and that in that interaction there where, you know, the wind can blow and the sun can be shining, and then, you know, and then that can change very quickly, and then you need to turn on thermals and you need that response very quickly. Now, in terms of the seasonal stuff, I mean, even though we're kind of saying, you know, gas has a big role and things like that, I would say for Europe, to the extent we are, you know, in bringing in some of the other points that we saw, you know, to the extent we are looking at increasing the import gap, that becomes, I think, a challenge for us. And the reason for that is, you know, if we've learned anything in the last couple of years is LNG isn't a great source of flexibility. It's either there and you can use it, or it isn't there and you can't use it. And you know what we've tended to see, even though we expected to see a lot more around, is it generally hasn't been there, right? And that's because Northeast Asia has been just such a big magnet and sucked up, you know, all of that kind of gas. And the question is, do you need then for Europe to get to the point where it's competing with, you know, actively competing with Northeast Asia, and Northeast Asia has some kind of demand response on price, right? And then that is, even in the forward markets, getting very volatile, because you need that signal, not today, you need that signal for 2 months ahead, right? Because that's when you can secure a cargo and get the gas into a storage tank, and then that's going to be kind of useful for you. So it's become, you know, a market where you have, you know, flexibility across the curve is becoming, you know, something important. And we do have this kind of weird thing though, even though you're saying all this flexibility, we've lost all this stuff from Groningen, but we still can't keep seasonal storage facilities open. And this is the, you know, the kind of great irony. Even, you know, and we have seen seasonal spreads improve a bit, but if we were to open up another rough in the UK, those seasonal spreads, even though they haven't improved enough, would then collapse again, right? And so there is this kind of chicken and egg thing with seasonal storage about its impact on the curves and how it plays that out. I mean, I think the main thing though to take away from that is, you know, when you're looking at it, if we are kind of saying, well, actually the Russian supply bubble is not that much of a bubble anymore. I mean, they don't have, you know, once Boven and Kova kind of runs its course, you know, it is going to be just hard for it to keep, you know, Gazprom to keep producing at the same current level. And unless, you know, we do see, you know, investment in other parts of the Russian network by other companies, and that pushes some Russian gas out of the Russian system and frees it up for Europe, we could be in a place where actually we're not getting that much additional gas anyways, you know, in Europe as a whole, because most of it will be, you know, it will be going into Northwest Europe, but it might not be going into the southern markets, you know, so much. So I think there's a lot of moving pieces. It is quite a complex beast in terms of, you know, are we going to have enough, you know, are we going to have enough gas? And then probably the answer is yes, we probably will. But at some point we may have to pay for it, and, you know, and pay a lot more for it. And that could be what we're kind of setting ourselves up for in the next couple of years, is much more expensive, much more volatile gas, much more sensitive, as we've seen, to extreme weather events. That's going to continue. We're not doing anything to take that away. You know, in terms of storage, we have the same levels or less. So I mean, there's some big challenges for the market as a whole, but the market, you know, but that's where I think, you know, as a European gas market we're headed, is it's kind of working okay. You know, I mean, there's lots of pipeline flexibility. Gas kind of goes where it's needed, but that's increasingly coming at the expense of high gas prices. Anyone else want to grab on that?
I just want to add on one thing, because I think what Trevor said is absolutely true, in the sense that prices have to incentivize the volumes which should come to Europe. And when we see where this flexibility comes from, if we look at the liquefaction capacity, it basically runs base load, because you have certain things which do prevent to produce at nameplate capacity, for instance, security issues or weather downturn or simple maintenance. So the flexibility basically comes from the contractual side. And in order to attract those volumes, we need to set some price incentives. And as we previously said, we are competing with other markets, and with some strong other markets like Asia, who has a certain policy behind it when we take China as an example.
I don't know if anybody else wants to comment. If there are no questions, then I'll move to Danilo. And would you like to say something, Robin? No, please. No, okay. I'm changing a bit topic. The presentation have been quite diverse, so that I'm trying to touch upon everything. So I go back to you and to come with comments on how effective the competition case on Gazprom can be, and whether Gazprom can actually become the solution to the problem of market integration in Central and Eastern Europe, to what extent. And then as a side element to the story that I'm trying to get from you, I would like to bring also the fact that Europe is now waiting for quite an important FID in Romania, which was supposed to come at the end of 17, then got moved in June 18. Now we're told December 18. I don't know if this will happen, and I'm referring to the Neptune fields in offshore Romania. Will this create a push on Gazprom, for instance, and will then make the competition, the implementation of the competition case more effective, or you see this in isolation and it's just my fantasy?
But I think what's the most effective thing, what's basically the settlement, the conditional settlement themselves. I mean, let's say they basically like provide for the price unification, because you cannot. Like basically, if you you have to adapt as Gazprom, you have to adapt your own contracts. I mean, to the new realities, because like you have there is a specific clause. I mean, which links it to the market price. Then of course, I mean, let's say the question is like theoretically you could have able to manipulate the market price, but when there is network codes, I mean, there's like multiple market instruments which prevents this. So I don't see the connection between these, let's say, two cases. Let's say that's just add additional supplies, to this part of Europe. But in terms of prices, let's say I don't think so. And I also would a bit disagree with Trevor regarding the prices. Yes, obviously, we see this push in prices. There's a competition with Asia. But if you see a bit further, let's say like on the two aspects in Europe, there's a policy aspect. If you see current regulations, they're very anti-gas. Say you go in like starting from Commission and a number of regulations in the member states, like they're, I would say like quite gas unfriendly. So like to sell the gas, it's an interest of like both utilities and external suppliers. It's of course you don't need it to price it very high, because it's not going to only compete against the other gas supplies, but also against renewables. So in a way, like survival of the industry depends on the like how expensive is the gas. Like gas in Europe cannot be expensive. Like I would say right now it's somehow maybe linked with surge. Again, an expected surge in China and oil prices, but by the end of the day, it's also in the interest of suppliers with the gas prices are not that high. For instance, there are two school of thoughts in Gazprom before. One of like fighting for price, a bit like Sonatra. Second is fighting for the market. The recent decision, even before the DG Comp case, showed what's more and more, gas was sold either directly dumped on the hubs, or sold in indexation to the hubs, because we were afraid of losing the market. They saw like we can go down until a certain price. There were many factors because of this, starting from US LNG going to like Qatar gas, etc., etc. And I don't think we'll see these things again happening again. Let's say in like huge surge, let's say, of price, because obviously, let's say you see renewables. and many of them, I mean, are getting quite competitive. And if you see the current regulations, they are all, I mean, let's say renewable standard, at least in Europe. I mean, let's say if you talk gas, I mean, let's say mostly talk like it's Asia. I mean, let's say a global thing, Asia, North America, but rarely Europe. I mean, it's in a way that would be the interest. So I see these 2 points. I mean, let's say for me, I'll also see and I agree with you, what energy security would be like outdated concept. Again, for the same thing, market forces infrastructure and the competition of non-fossil fuels, I mean, which I think we shouldn't underestimate.
Thank you. Trevor, you're back, and you've been quoted several times. So because you're a good speaker, people were probably, including me, led to believe that LNG was both an available and accessible source of supply and flexibility to Europe. And then we have heard that, well, it's not so much true, because the volumes, when you look at the overall supply picture, are not that big, and also LNG does require a response time which is led by the dynamics of the shipping business. So the question for you is whether you buy into sort of this mitigation of your enthusiastic view, and B, whether there is any room for Europe to do something about it. We understand it's a price matter ultimately, but is there anything else that could help Europe to attract more LNG, and therefore use LNG as a way to respond to, for instance, the flexibility requirement we have been told about?
Good question. I think it's important to understand, when you have the LNG value chain, that production is very much a long-term play, lots of investments, everybody's put a lot of money into producing the LNG. On the consumption side, all of the new markets are really emerging markets. So talk China, Pakistan, India, Southeast Asia generally, South America. They don't have yet developed gas markets on the other side. So now you have a global gas value chain that has heavily invested in production, that is not flexible, cannot ramp up or down, despite what everything says, or it shouldn't ramp up or down. And you have new gas demand markets, which are also rather unflexible in terms. The only player that can provide flexibility for this is Europe. So from my view, going forward, the model that I'd like to see, or that I think we will see, is that Europe will play its role as the only flexibilities provider for the LNG value chain. And therefore, as a flexibility provider, anybody who's been trading flexibility has a price. Flexibility should eventually be traded, and the same thing is going to happen on the LNG side. So if you're sitting on a position in regasification into Europe, you're not sitting on an import position, you're sitting on a flexibility position. I speak from experience. I ran a terminal in the UK for 6 years, an import terminal. And for 6 years, we stood there and we had 3 to 10 cargoes arrive every year. And people said, must be a horrible terminal, it must be a terrible business. The reality is, out of these 3 to 10 cargoes we delivered, we didn't want to deliver any of them. We also wanted to deliver everything into Asia. And we made tens of millions on taking it into Asia. But without the European flexibility positions, you wouldn't be able to do that play. And therefore, lots of people talk about utilization. Will Europe see more LNG? I think all of this is not really the question. Europe is always going to be, going forward, the only flexibility provider for the global LNG value chain. And therefore, if you're sitting there and saying, Europe is my default market, every time it spikes anywhere else, I'll take the LNG to other markets, that's the role it's going to play. But we talked earlier about, I think somebody mentioned that Asia is actually quite price sensitive. And that's, a lot of people don't understand. We talk about China. I spent a lot of time in China. For 2 years, they have been importing more gas than anybody expected. They've done very well. Believe me, when you talk to the Chinese privately, they're not happy about it. They do not want to pay the gas price. And it actually was really not what they planned on paying global LNG price to substitute the coal. That was not in their plan, and they're trying everything they can to try to mitigate that cost. LNG is very expensive for China, and they had to pay up for it. They're trying desperately now with the power of Siberia pipeline to get diversification. And I think you're going to see China much more price sensitive going forward than they have been in the last 2 years. They kind of stumbled into this. I don't think they really knew that they're planning this themselves. They ended up paying dearly for it. And if anybody knows, nobody wants to overpay for their energy. And the Chinese certainly didn't want to pay global LNG prices. So I think in the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see China much smarter, balancing out LNG with pipeline supply from Russia and other regions, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, which is cheaper or at par than what LNG is. They're going to negotiate and play them off against each other, which they're already doing very well. They're going to the Russians and saying, look, we've got this LNG, you need to come down in price. Then they come down in price, look, we've got this price. So they're very good at that. I think if that happens, China is still going to be a key market, but the LNG that's coming on the market destined for China will need to go somewhere else. And the only liquid market is Europe. And that's what's going to play it forward.
Thank you. It kind of fits.
Can I just add? I mean, it's actually, like, I think very interesting what Klaus said about Chinese, and I think there was like some indirect, indications that you're absolutely right, because after this unexpected surge in price and in volumes, like if you see the negotiation on the second route, so-called Altai route intensified, let's say, which was, going, let's say, like 4 ages and without no success. And the second pipeline route, is now, considered almost a reality, at least as a decision, and I think it's because of the reasons you mentioned.
No, I spent time in Turkmenistan, and this is another story. A lot of people live. Turkmenistan used to produce 80 BCM, 70s, 90 BCM, and they're now doing a fifth of that. And they have a lot of potential to produce more. Guess where the Chinese were parked? They were in Ashgabat negotiating, trying to find new routes long-term to bring this gas. They're desperately looking for diversification to try to balance off this expensive LNG. So a lot of people, I don't know how successful they are, but I've seen in the long term, they usually get their way.
I'll just take a slightly different tack on the Chinese, because I think, where gas is going in China is it is going into very inflexible users, i.e. it's going into industry, it's going into rescom. This isn't stuff that switches on and off very, very quickly. And it's going in, and this is the price they're paying, but this is the price they're paying for clean air. And trust me, the Chinese are willing to pay for clean air. And this is, so all of that gas is going into the urban gas center. Very little of it's going into power. Not very. We've never seen it very much into power. And so they've still got that growth. But it's going in, and it's going at levels that is barely comprehensible to us, right? This is why, this year we're probably seeing demand coming in at about 38 BCM higher, right? It's enormous, and that's why they've taken 16 million tons of LNG more, right? And if you look at, the power of Siberia is 38 BCM, and that 38 BCM is going to be reached in 2025, right? It's not soon, right? And it took the Chinese, Klaus's point that the Chinese worry about prices, absolutely the case. And that's why it took 10 years for the Chinese and the Russians to agree a price for that pipe. And anyone thinking they're going to agree something on the West Line quickly, I think, is very, very optimistic, given how long the first one took. Now, in terms of increasing Turkmen gas and things like that, you can do, but they are hitting up against capacity constraints. You've only got 55 BCM of capacity on that Central Asian gas pipeline and the West-East pipeline. Pardon? Well, so the question is, are they going to build the new? Because they had the next line of that, and then they suspended it indefinitely, and they haven't brought that back from being suspended indefinitely. But it is just a question of, do you have enough infrastructure to diversify? What's going to be the easiest thing for the Chinese to do? Is that going to be to add some regas, and you're probably seeing... You're not seeing that much actually next year, but you may be seeing 6 million tons, of new regas. capacity coming in. That's a big number for any other country, but for China, that's not that big. And then you're maybe seeing, and for 2020, you might get another 6 or 8. And, it's kind of going that clip. And what really happened in the last couple of years is, you've had that big push for gas demand and it expands so quickly, but it's filled up its capacity now. So it really becomes a capacity play of how quickly it can draw on stuff. And I think, that will be the key thing that slows that Chinese LNG demand. It's not, I don't think it's so much competition, but it is just, they're going to want a lot of gas, because that's going to, the process is just going to continue. And they are seeing better air quality, but it's not anywhere close to being finished. And it's a very big country. And, I think the question is, when does that slow down? And I'm like, well, it doesn't slow down that underlying growth probably doesn't slow down next year, and maybe. So I think they have a couple of years of real hard winters to get through in terms of that tightness. And it just becomes that, how quickly can they expand the various capacity, the various capacity links that they're looking at. The first thing will be Power of Siberia, which comes in, but even Gazprom has said 5 million tons, 5 BCM a year until 2025, so.
I mean, at risk of almost sounding like Trump, we keep on saying China, 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 but it seems important. So, but I see, Volker, you want to comment as well.
Also on China. So but I make it short. So two things I would like to mention is the determination of China to improve the air quality. What has happened last winter, and I think that was Klaus referring to, that the increase in LNG import, the incremental, was quite substantial. What really happened in the country was that they were sending officials to the industry and telling them that if they don't switch their coal boiler off, the whole factory won't produce. And I think that shows how determined this country is in order to improve the air quality. And they are doing a lot about it. And one thing, of course, which is a bit uncertain, how much this always will be the LNG imports which will balance it, because they are investing in storage. And I think that's also one thing we should mention here, because China, they are building up now storage, but in terms of their flexibility needs compared to other European countries, like Germany, for instance, their storage capacity is rather small. So they are now trying to invest in it, and if they are successful, they will, of course, provide some flexibility out of the storage, so not that massive amount of incremental LNG import might be seen in the future. But again, this also will depend on how quickly they increase their demand in the next years. And that is something, I mean, as Trevor said, the determination is there. How strongly it would implement it, we will see.
On paper, we still have 20 minutes, 15 minutes to go. I go back again to the audience if there are questions. Otherwise, I keep on. Okay.
I have one question to the Chinese growing demand, and basically it's LNG incremental demand. What is the capacity? Like how quick they build new terminals? Yeah, because there's also they need to build the new regasification terminals, and it's not so easy, not so quick.
So I make one first answer on this. I mean, it not necessarily has to be LNG, because as Klaus mentions, they are building also new pipeline capacity to Russia. So this also will be a balance. And what we see also, if you look into the reports of, for instance, CNPC, they're also trying to increase the indigenous production, because of course they don't want to be exposed so much on the global market. They try to balance it, and indigenous production is one factor they could do. If we look at the numbers we have seen in previous years, what we've seen is that they manage about 10 BCM by year to increase the indigenous production. If they really can do much more, it heavily depends on their geology. So far, they've struggled really to do more, but they're investing more. So it not necessarily has to be only LNG import, but so far, you are right, it has been the major source of incremental supply.
Okay. I hesitate between like pulling a conclusion, drawing conclusion on this, and jumping on completely different topics. How is the energy in the audience? Because if we look at consistency of the story, I think we do have a couple of points, or maybe three. The first one is the fact that there hasn't been any call for major reforms for the functioning of the European market. There are some issues, but it hasn't come up. And that's for me already a good take-home message. The second message is that partly because of the new supply picture at the indigenous level, but also because of some infrastructure issues like RAF in the UK. But we haven't mentioned TEMP, but TEMP being off for a couple of years has had a number of consequences. Flexibility is the real driver, or the real element that will make or not the business for European players. And then the third message that I bring home from this afternoon is really that we, rather from a flexibility point of view, rather than a supply point of view, Europe will be more and more, and is already part of a global market via LNG, and therefore any development that we'll be seeing in Europe will be very much influenced also by things happening everywhere in the world. We've seen from rainfalls in Brazil to the policy commitment of the Chinese government. We haven't touched upon at all, possibly because of the expertise available on the future role of gas or green gases, but that's another element that will complicate further the picture. Whether it will play a big role or not, it will probably do differently so in different markets, but that's another variable that we will have to look at. But I think we do have a story, so I guess we can go off and enjoy the rest of the afternoon and the rest of the utility week.